meaningful. And he simply just said, speak from your heart. So I know that land acknowledgements can be performative and are repetitive reminders of treaties that have been broken. The Just Recovery policy paper is an attempt to work within the confines of colonial structures that uphold land theft, dispossession, resource extraction, and ongoing genocide. The Just Recovery Coalition must broaden our political orientation to go beyond truth and reconciliation towards land back. And I also sometimes like to share an action that anybody in this Zoom call can do. Is an action that I suggest is to find one nation of this land and learn what Hamilton means in that nation's language. I'll share in the chat, but I've learned that in Mohawk, a word for what is Hamilton is Aurora-go, and it's spelled, and I'll give the what it looks like in the chat, and it is translated directly to mean the ditch, in the ditch, or the ravine. So the land is directly influenced, the language is directly influenced by the land. So I've introduced myself, Katie King, Hamilton Community Benefits Network. I'm going to be going through the agenda and a little bit about Just Recovery policy paper and what the coalition is. But before that, I want to pass it over to Marnie, who is another facilitator.
Thank you. My name is Marnie Schurter. I am a co-chair of Hamilton Mountain Chapter. Just a moment. For those who are new to ACORN, we are a tenant and community organization. We work at all levels of government for social and financial justice. Our campaigns here in Hamilton are focused on tenant rights and the digital divide.
And I think Liz next.
My name is Liz Scott. I'm the chairperson for Stony Creek chapter.
And I'm Ian Borsick. I'm the interim executive director in Environment Hamilton. And I'll pass it back to Katie.
Also, folks are welcome to put intros in the chat. We're just not going to go through everybody since we have a larger group here. So feel free to share in the chat what ward you're tuning in from and something you'd like to see change in Hamilton. I'm also going to quickly go over the workshop rules, which are on the next, are not on the next slide, but they're referred to on the next slide. The workshop rules for tonight. I'm going to remind everyone that we're going to keep everyone muted until the end of the workshop, where there will be a chance for questions and a discussion. If you have questions earlier on that you want to get down and put it in the chat, and we'll try to keep track of them. Please be respectful to other attendees and the workshop facilitators. Discrimination of any form will not be tolerated. We are going to take photos, and this session is also being recorded. So if you do not want to be visually on the screen, take your camera off, but if you don't mind, we encourage you to put your camera on. And then finally, please feel free to use the chat, but please keep comments in the chat just relevant to Just Recovery and the workshop. And yeah, so the agenda for tonight, Budget 101, which Ian's going to cover. Just Recovery campaign, I'm going to go over a little bit, and then Olivia, Marnie, and Liz are going to explain a bit about how to delegate at Public Delegation Day. think the next. And then before we get to Ian, I'm gonna go through what the Just Recovery Coalition is. So folks here have probably already heard about Just Recovery since there was a policy paper released in early 2022 or late 2021. It was manifested in 2021. That's when I first heard about it. And then kind of similar to this year, a group of community members were engaged with to delegate at last year's public delegations before the 2022 budget was decided. I think this is my first time working like staffed with Just Recovery. I was interested in the paper last time it came out, but so what I've learned from this time around is that it was originally the idea was developed to bring together different nonprofit organizations throughout the city that were doing separate work and trying to collaborate on a collective vision of what Hamilton could be following the pandemic. We now know that the pandemic is just continuing. So we've developed a second round of the policy paper with some recommendations carried forward from the first paper. Anyways, so yeah, folks got together and kind of brought separate expertise and experience to create this roadmap of policy that the city was encouraged to look at to implement more progressive, just, sustainable, inclusive policy. So that last time, I'm going to drop the link for the website in the chat. The website's been updated so you can access the first policy paper and the second policy paper through the website. First time around, there was 152 recommendations, and this time around we have 126 recommendations, some new, some carried over from last time. And then also on the website, you're able to see some of the different organizations that were involved. Not necessarily every organization involved in the paper is in a coalition member, but some groups were consulted. And then not necessarily every group involved in the paper is a nonprofit. Some are community groups or non-registered grassroots organizations. And we have some new folks around this time around, and so also the last thing I wanted to say, please feel free to ask questions because I might not have covered everything. We shout out to our illustrator Sunny Singh, who sent us a new batch of illustrations that follow the theme of last year, and I'll put his website in the chat as well. I think that's about it on the Just Recovery Coalition. So I'm going to pass it over to Ian. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Yeah, so before we get into the details of delegating, I'm going to give a very high level explanation of municipal budgets, and specifically the municipal budget for the city of Hamilton. This is going to be a high level overview. Later on in the meeting, after we talk about delegations, I will be showing you the City of Hamilton website, and there is more information about the budgets there. And you could spend hours reading about the budget. In fact, that's what our city councils are doing right now. But we're just going to do a high-level summary, and I'm just going to be touching on some key highlights that we, as the hosts of this workshop, think it's worthwhile just to share with you. So, Liv, if you could just take it to the next slide, please. So this is a graph that I'm sure folks on the call have seen in various forms over the years. This is from 2022. And this was essentially how our tax dollars were spent. Basically, the way that the city prepares it is that this is the idea of where an average home would be spending their tax dollars on. But ultimately, this is a breakdown on how the 2022 budget fell together. It's important to note that this is the last budget of the last term of council. And so the 2023 budget could end up looking quite different. but we'll see, as because ultimately what happens is that the budgetary cycle begins essentially in late fall and continues through until the winter of the early next year. However, budgetary work continues throughout the whole year. And as you can see from this graph, our tax dollars in the municipality goes to an incredible amount of services and infrastructure within the municipality. And in a lot of ways over the years, more and more responsibilities have been downloaded to municipalities. So Olivia, if you could take me to the next slide, please. So essentially, we as residents of the city of Hamilton, we pay for services through two main ways: taxes and essentially also paying for services, so rates and fees. So if you think about your property tax and then rates and fees, so for things like water and the like, that money goes to the city of Hamilton, and then those dollars are used on our services and infrastructure. Ongoing costs, so costs that need to be renewed, things like staff time, ongoing products that have to constantly be bought, so such as fuel and the like, that goes into operating. And then hard infrastructure, one-time purchases and the like goes to capital. So for example, a road will have an operating cost and a capital cost. The capital cost is the upfront cost of placing that road where it is, and then the operating cost is the upkeep for that road, so fixing potholes and the like going forward. Olivia, can you take me to the next slide, please? So what do municipalities actually do? We've talked a lot about different pieces, and we were looking at a general high-level summary of where our tax dollars go to, but it's incredibly important to note, and the reason why we're all as municipal organizations really focus in on this as the Just Recovery Coalition, that there's a lot that municipalities can do further and do better of. So we'll just go for one example. Olivia, could you just take me to the next slide? So for a bus, we might be thinking that you pay your fare to get on the bus. That's a user fee. But in addition to that, our tax dollars go towards the purchasing of that bus, the maintenance of that bus, paying the operator of that bus, designing and paying for the routes, so paying for the expertise that designs our transit network and the like. And so ultimately, when we're talking about the HSR budget, there's many different moving pieces there. And so while ultimately we from the outside are looking at something like the HSR budget and it should be increased or decreased, but we think it should be increased. For budgetary staff, they're looking at the very specific details of how much individual pieces cost. And ultimately, city staff are trying to reduce costs at every corner. That doesn't necessarily mean they're trying to be austere, but it does mean that they're trying to cut costs and find the best value for tax dollars as they possibly can. And then eventually that can reach to a point where austerity measures are taken in a political way. But it's important to note that ultimately, when a city puts out a request for proposal, perhaps the city's going to be purchasing a group of new buses. They ultimately try to purchase the buses that will bring the best value for dollar. And then as well, the city of Hamilton also negotiates with the ATU 107, which is the Amalgamated Transit Union 107, which is our bus drivers union, and tries to negotiate them for good value for service and good value for their labor as well, which is important to note. Olivia, could you take me to the next slide, please? And so within the municipality, it's important to note that all these different pieces that the municipality oversees fall within different departments. There are departments within departments, but there are four key main departments that the city oversees, that our council ultimately sits on committees that oversee. There's the Healthy and Safe Communities, which includes public health, corporate services, planning and economic development, and public works. And public works is huge. It includes basically everything else in the municipality, including transit and the like. But it's also important to note that planning and economic development is also quite large, and there's many different moving pieces, and staff will have to collaborate across departments as well. Olivia, could you take me to the next slide, please? And this is just a general overview of where what our council's been looking at. This was presented by staff just very recently, and this is the 2023 net operating budget by department. And then at the far right, you're going to see the percent increase to the budgetary piece. So you can see here that we're seeing budgetary increases for most departments across the board. It is also important that that percentage increase is in relation to that individual department. So while we may be looking at healthy and safe communities with a 10.1% increase, you have to look at the dollar totals for that to really parse out where our money is going towards. And then you can also see something that's within our Just Recovery Policy document. The City Enrichment Fund is sitting at 0% increase. And if I'm not mistaken, this will be a full decade of 0% increases across the board for the City Enrichment Fund. So the $6 million that the City Enrichment Fund sits on, they've been sitting on for a very long time. So inflation, increased costs of things drive costs up. New measures that the city is undertaking, new services, new projects that the city is undertaking, those cause stressors on the budget and cause budgets to go up. And if they don't continue to go up, they will remain stagnant. So the City Enrichment Fund has been 6 million for a very long time now. And when you factor in inflation, it's actually been shrinking. So if you could take me to the next slide, please. This is from 2022. And this is a levy breakdown by division within the healthy and safe communities. So I just wanted to show this really quickly, just so everyone can kind of get an idea of the types of different departments that you can find within departments. So within healthy and safe communities, you have public health, but in addition to that, you also have the paramedic service, the fire department, long-term care, housing services, and the like beyond that too. So the city of Hamilton oversees quite a lot, and ultimately all these different services that we rely on, or in some cases hope we won't have to rely on, lie within these different departments. Next slide, please. And then within corporate services, you also have the Office of the City Clerk, customer service, financial planning, financial services and taxation, legal and risk management, as well as information technology. So there's lots of different pieces that fall within that department. And so if you think about it, if anyone here has been into City Hall, not for the purposes of delegating, but perhaps to get a business license or the like, that's within corporate services. Could you take me to the next slide, please, Olivia? And then, of course, the city budget also oversees boards and agencies that ultimately report to the city of Hamilton. That includes our conservation authorities, the Farmers Market Board, which has been in the news quite a bit over the years, the Hamilton Beach Rescue Unit, MPAC, which is now, which is basically the committee that oversees the value of properties, the Royal Botanical Gardens, the police department as well. There is an independent committee for the police department budget, the library, and then of course the City Enrichment Fund, which I was talking about earlier. Next slide, please. And then, as I mentioned before, Public Works is a behemoth of a department, and these are all of the various different departments that fall within Public Works. So if you were joining this workshop thinking, I want to talk about parks, I want to talk about tree maintenance, it's Public Works that you're speaking to, and that's the budget you're looking at. But ultimately, it is really important to note that there is an incredible amount of work and different moving parts within the Public Works department. And we're just showing this as an example. Could you move on to the next slide, please? And so, more relevant to our delegation workshop, each budgetary cycle, the city will identify budget pressures. Budget pressures are essentially new spending that wasn't accounted for in the previous budgetary cycle. The city of Hamilton and our budgetary staff really like to have a very clear roadmap going forward of where money is going to be spent. And in a lot of ways, I think we can all relate to it. It'd be really nice if we could just plan ahead and know 5-10 years down the road how much things are going to cost. But new projects emerge, new services emerge that city council will endorse, and ultimately what in many cases are hard-won victories by the community end up becoming budgetary pressures. So it becomes the responsibility of city council to follow through and find ways of funding these things and making sure that if they are going to be increasing taxes to pay for these new services, that there is full comprehension of how that's happening and they can communicate clearly to the public of why that's happening. And some of these examples of pressures have been things like the 10-year transit strategy when it was first initially passed, sidewalk snow clearing, and more, including many things that would probably be in the Just Recovery Coalition policy paper. Next slide, please. And so I'm going to be passing it over to Marnie very soon, but I'll just pause here. This is the key dates from the City of Hamilton website for the 2023 budget. As you can see here, public delegations actually were conducted on November 21st, 2022. And that's actually months after the budgetary cycle actually really started in earnest. City staff were making presentations and preliminary budget presentations as early as back in October, as well as just leading up to the municipal election that we had in October as well. Then throughout January, there's a variety of departmental presentations. Then essentially what tries to happen is that there's other pieces that fall within there, and then they'll have further meetings if required, as you can see there. The city tries to have a targeted budget approval for the March council meeting, which is scheduled for March 29th. That's the targeted budget approval because it could obviously go further beyond that, but it's usually not. And then, of course, Public Delegation Day, and what we hope all of you will register to delegate for, is on February 6th, so Monday next week. Beyond this, it's really important to note that in a lot of cases, as you can also see here, the rate budget has been presented already. The tax supported capital budget has been presented already. And perhaps most alarmingly, the capital budget has actually been approved by council already. So despite the fact that public delegations are now giving us 2 days, and before it used to be just 1, we are still all delegating on this budgetary cycle after approval of the capital budget has already been approved. And in many ways, that public delegation day on November 21st is far too late for many of the decisions that are being made by council already. So it's really important to note that because of the Just Recovery Coalition and our work that we're doing, it doesn't just stop with this municipal budget cycle. We will continue to advocate year round, and it's also really important for us to have, as the community in the city of Hamilton, to keep up pressure on our council year round as well. And with that, and talking about keeping pressure on our city council, I'm going to pass it over to Marnie, and she's going to start talking to us about how to actually delegate and what to expect. So Marnie, if you would please take it away. Oh, Marty, you're on mute. Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Marty. I was actually going to be passing it to Katie. This is my fault.
Okay.
Liv, could you go to the previous slide? And just talking on all that, Katie was just going to go over some of our Just Recovery Hamilton principles for the 2023 budget. Thank you so much, and apologies, Katie.
No worries. I was just going through the paper to try and come up with examples for each section, but I only came up with a few so far. But I would recommend people pull this up maybe while I'm talking if they're able to, the second policy paper, because all of these, the Just Recovery Hamilton principles, are in sections throughout the paper. So the paper is like guided through these sections. This list isn't actually in order of what it is in this round, the second paper. But basically each kind of organizations work together in terms of their specialty and helped hash out these sections. So the guiding principles that are carried from the first paper and are consistent in this paper are investing in women. So I know there in this paper, there was a lot of discussion and a section about the lack of affordable and accessible childcare spaces in the city. Mobility justice. There is a petition being run that just came out yesterday by Hamilton and District Labor Council for care, called Care Fair, which is an initiative that's trying to make the HSR free for seniors, people on ODSP, youth, and people with living with disabilities. Housing as a human right is obviously a huge section, which is covered in the paper. Tackling systemic racism is another section. Investing in decent jobs, decent wages, and our local economy is covered. Focus on inclusive city building is another section. Investing in green infrastructure. And then the final section in the paper is supporting Two-Spirit and LGBTQIA+ communities. And each section has a handful of policies under it. So they're all bolded throughout the paper. So it's easier to know for your eyes to kind of like be drawn to those recommendations. And I'm sure we'll talk about this in the discussion and throughout delegation, but I find it helpful in delegation to choose a section that you feel most passionate about and kind of hone in on the predetermined policy recommendations existing in that section. Okay, Marnie, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now we're going to go over what it means to delegate at City Hall. What is delegation? Delegation is your opportunity to let our elected officials know your opinion on issues they are discussing. You have 5 minutes in total to present your opinion on the issue up for discussion before the mayor, councilors, city staff, and the public. In this case, the 2023 budget. There are 4 ways to delegate: in person at City Hall on the day, virtually online on the day, submit a pre-recorded video, and the 4th one is a written delegation. Why is it important? City councilors are ultimately responsible to those who elect them. Hearing from members of the public gives them another way in which to view a particular issue. Spending priority budget. Delegating to the councilors and mayor lets them have an opportunity to explain your experiences and how the decisions are making could directly affect you or people you represent. Without hearing from you, councilors can only depend on staff reports and their own experiences. This can often be very different from your own lived reality. I'll pass to Liz.
What to talk about? Remember, you have 5 minutes and they'll keep you to it. Focus in on the core points you want to get across and work from there. It can be easiest and most effective to tell your own personal story. Don't worry about presenting facts and figures. This is your time to share what you value and what the council to prioritize. Don't be afraid to repeat others or endorse public demands. For example, last time I delegated, I spoke about the housing crisis and how it impacted tenants in my community and why the city needs to take action. Now I'll pass it back over to Ian.
Thanks, Liz. So, Olivia, I think the next slide is the slide apologizing that we need to switch over. Am I correct? Yes, okay. I'm just going to be sharing my screen. Just give me one moment, everyone. And then there we go. So, how to register to delegate. We used to, in these workshops, because we've been doing these for a few years now, we used to just have some screenshots of what the City of Hamilton website looks like, but it's a brand new city website. And so we thought it might just be easiest just to screen share. And what I'll do is in real time, I'll show you guys where you can find all this information and how to delegate. So if you go to the City of Hamilton website, which is hamilton.ca, you'll land on this large, beautiful page with not a lot of information. And in fact, the City of Hamilton's actually done a better job this year than in years past, because if you scroll down, you'll actually see that they have the 2023 budget right here under the featured services. And it says, have your say in the 2023 budget process. This is where you can find the button for public delegations. However, if you are planning on delegating in the future and not just for the 2023 budget delegation, you actually would just have to scroll a little bit further and you can see here the City Council button and you would click on this. And then from there, you can see that there's a variety of different pieces here and the like. And ultimately what you would be doing if you didn't click that earlier button that I pointed out, you would then click on council and committee meetings. And then over here on the left, it says request to speak to a committee of council. Also, what you can find on this website is agendas and videos and video recordings from previous meetings. You can also find the committee listing and the meeting calendar. So if at any point you wanted to delegate to a committee and you weren't sure when that committee is next meeting, this is where you would find it. But for our purposes of delegating to the public delegation day, which is on Monday, February 6th, we know that we want to delegate to that one. So I'm going to click on request to speak to a committee of council. And then here you're going to find a lot of information about how to delegate. We are not going to be delegating to city council exactly. What we are going to be doing is delegating to a committee of council. The committee of council that we're delegating to is the General Issues Committee. General Issues Committee is basically what it sounds like. Anything that doesn't fall within any of the other committees goes to General Issues Committee. And sometimes there are pieces that would go typically to Public Works, to planning and the like. But because not every single city councilor sits on each of those committees, they sometimes send things over to the GIC, which does compose of all of council and the mayor, just to ensure that everyone will be able to talk about it. And it's important to note that all committee meetings and all committee decisions that are made are then sent to council for final approval. But we, in this case, are going to be delegating to the General Issues Committee. And the reason why we are going to be doing that is because we know that the city of Hamilton has identified February 6th, the General Issues Committee meeting, to be for the public delegation day. And that's also what you can find on the City of Hamilton website labeled there. You can find some more information that details on how to make a written submission, how to make a pre-recorded submission, and how to make oral submissions during hybrid meetings. To begin with, for writing to City Council, it's pretty darn easy. All you have to do is either email the clerk, which is clerk@hamilton.ca, or you can write a written letter. And as long as you submit those written comments before noon, the day before the meeting, they will be on the agenda, and they will be on the agenda for the meeting, and they'll be publicly available. So again, if you wanted to submit a written delegation, it would have to be by noon the day before. In this case, if you want to submit a written delegation for Monday, it would have to be this Friday before noon. For a pre-recorded submission, this means you're recording a video beforehand, like you can't, go to City Hall or you have work that day and you can't just sit around on your computer all day waiting for your delegation. This is when you would be recording the video beforehand, and then you submit it to the clerk. You can either email it to the clerk or drop off a USB. Another means of doing this is if you have a means to upload a video, perhaps to YouTube or something like that. If you have a YouTube account, you can also send a link to the clerk, and that has worked in the past as well. This is important that you have to get this 2 business days before the meeting, before noon. So in this case, if you're submitting a pre-recorded delegation, it has to be submitted this Thursday, so tomorrow before noon, to be made it onto the agenda. And then the clerk will then play that video live at the end of the delegation streams and any other videos that they've received for council to view, and for anyone else who's watching the meeting. And then there's oral submissions. Before the pandemic, you would just simply go in person. Now we have the option of delegating virtually, much like how we're all engaged with each other virtually right now. And these happen in very similar ways. And what I'm actually going to be doing is walking us through on how to register for this. It's important to note that for this, same rules apply for written delegations. You simply have to request to meet by noon the business day before. So in this case, Friday, to register for Monday. And then if you have any questions or concerns, you can also reach out to the clerk. They also have the extension here during business hours that you can call. But it's important to note that as long as you get your request in on time, you will be delegating. So I'm going to be scrolling down here, and you can see this is the submit to request to speak form. I've already requested to speak, so I'm not going to be clicking submit at the end of this, but I am going to be inputting my information so everyone can see what that is. What you're going to do is you're going to click on General Issues Committee, because we know, again, that it's a General Issues Committee meeting on the 6th, and I would like to register in person. You can register virtually or in person. It does not matter at this case, but whatever your preference is. If you are going to be delegating via pre-recorded video, this is where you would press yes, and then it gives you all that information. But in the case of me, no, I'm delegating in person, and I'm not going to be delegating via pre-recorded video. Here, I would put in my information. I would write down my name, and then for me, I'd be delegating on behalf of Environment Hamilton, so I would include that, and then I would include my information here. It's important to note for the city clerks that they only ask for this information to prove that you are a City of Hamilton resident. If you aren't a resident of the City of Hamilton, that's something that they want to know because that's something that councilors will want to know. This information will not be made publicly available. Because I am a public lobbyist, essentially on behalf of Environment Hamilton, the mailing address that I provide to clerks is my work address. And in some cases, the clerks know that that's our work address because our office is in the Workers' Arts and Heritage Building. However, for anyone else, your mailing address, your phone, your email, and any other private information other than your basic name and why you want to delegate will be redacted for the public record. So you don't have to worry about submitting your address and then having your address be on the public record. It's only for the purposes of clerks. So you would fill all that in, and then you would give them your preferred pronoun, and then you would write down your reason for the delegation request. In the case of our February 6th delegation, you would simply say, I would like to delegate on the 2023 budget. That's all you have to say. In the cases of other meetings where there's a specific item that you want to delegate to, let's say there's a staff report coming forward to Public Works and you want to delegate and speak to that specific staff report, this would be where you input that information to say, hey, I want to speak to the HSR report on, April 5th, or whatever day it is. And it's also important just to note that if for future uses, so then that way clerks know which meeting you want to delegate at. In the case of everyone, I'm pretty sure on this call, you will be asked if you're requesting funds from the city. You say no. Even if you are requesting funds to be spent elsewhere, you're not asking funds for yourself. And then will you be submitting a formal presentation? You don't have to. And in fact, if you have slides or other material that you want to be using that you don't necessarily want to submit beforehand, you don't have to, as if you're going to be screen sharing through WebEx or bringing a USB key. But if you want to ensure that your delegation in that presentation is part of the agenda is on the public record, click yes here, so then that way clerks know that they need to get the presentation from you. And then after here, you can see there's a variety of different pieces of information. They ask you if you're a lobbyist and the like, but all you have to do is then click submit. I am going to then take us over into this slideshow here. After you've submitted your delegation request, the clerks will send you an automatic email saying, we've gone your request. And then they'll also resubmit everything that you submitted to the city. So if you got something wrong, if you got the date wrong, if you put in your wrong phone number or email, you can fix it at that point and reach out to clerks. And then the clerk for that meeting will follow up with you by email, and they'll tell you, hey, you're added to the agenda as a request. Procedurally, the city of Hamilton operates by some fairly standard bureaucratic rules. So when you're delegating to council, they first have to approve your request, and then you are then added to the agenda officially. It's important to note that in all of the years that I've been delegating to council, I have never seen a delegation request rejected by a council in the past 4 councils. It's just a procedural issue that they have to go through, in that they have to accept your request and then you're added to the agenda. So the clerk's email will confirm that. I'll show you a clerk's email that I received just to confirm that as well, but don't be thrown off by that. You will be delegating that day. Don't worry, clerks will make sure that you know that. If you're going to be delegating virtually, they'll also send you a second email. That second email has the link to the WebEx, very similar to how you get a link in your email after you register for a Zoom. And then they'll have a variety of different rules for the WebEx. They'll tell you just remain mute and keep your camera off, and they'll tell you to not use the chat as well. However, it is also good on the day of, if you want to arrive early at City Hall, it's also good to log into the WebEx a little bit early, because clerks typically make it a habit of checking in with the delegates, making sure that the cameras work, making sure that the mics work. So then that way, when the chair for the meeting calls on you, that you can just unmute yourself, turn on your camera, and get started right away, and everything will work right away. It's important to note that if you have any issues or concerns, reach out to the clerks. That it is their job to ensure that you delegate and you have no issues when you're delegating to council. Next, I'm just going to show this email. This is the email that I received when I requested to speak in person at the meeting. This is the email I got back from the clerks. In this case, it was from Angela from the clerk's office, very specifically, and they used their own personal email from the city website, from the city to communicate with you, and they'll give you all that information. So if any of you on the call are to register to speak in person, you are going to receive essentially the exact same email that I received. And then if you register to speak virtually, you'll receive essentially the same email, but it'll be just slightly different with the WebEx information in it. With that, if you have any questions or concerns, or if you've run into any issues with delegations, we in Environment Hamilton and Hamilton Acorn and Hamilton Community Benefits Network, we run these workshops for a reason. We want you to delegate. If you run into any issues or have any problems along the way, feel free to reach out to us at any time. We're here to help. We do a lot of delegations, all of us. We're happy to help out with any issues that may arise. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Katie to go over some important dates that we have coming up.
Okay. Hello, everybody. So budget delegation day, public delegation day set aside for the public starts at 3 p.m. next Monday, February 6th. Usually they do start earlier, but they're starting later this year. So it could be a longer night for folks. But so yeah, maybe good for people who are working during the day, then they can, then if they given, so if you given your, I'm not positive about this. So yeah, don't quote me, but if you sign up at the last possible moment, so like Friday morning, because you have to sign up to live or virtually delegate like in real time by Friday the 3rd at 12 p.m. Then you would probably be at the later end of the delegation list because they list it based on time of signing up. So there's a
In
chance.
fact, sorry, Katie, I was just going to say they can quote you on that. So the order in which that the delegation requests are presented on the agenda are the order in which clerks received them.
Yeah.
And something that I should have mentioned during the meeting as well is that if you're late, if you have some technical issue and you can't log into WebEx, you're not there physically at City Hall at the time that when you're called, you will then be put to the bottom of the list and clerks and the chair will circle back to you. So if you're late, you have to log off for a brief moment or whatever, clerks at the end of the meeting will then say, hey, Katie King, final call. Are you here? And then if Katie was late getting to City Hall and just missed her chance when she was called initially, she would then be allowed to delegate them.
Okay, sweet. Maybe that's why they are starting later to accommodate people who are working too. So yeah, get your live or virtual delegation request in by this Friday. So 2 days from now at noon. And then tomorrow is the last day to get in your pre-recorded video at 12 p.m. as well. And I've recorded mine before on my phone, and then I had to go online and condense it to email it to the clerk for it to fit on an email. So there's like online video condensing websites. You can just do it through there. It comes up a little blurry, but I found I couldn't attach it properly. So I don't think there's any other dates. Yep. And then please check out the paper. And I just was dropping in a few points that are like kind of hot topics, maybe like from my perspective in the chat. Again, the care fair recommendation on page 18. And then also there is on page 24 under the tackling the rise of hate and racism, there's mention of the community safety and well-being plan, which is like pretty comprehensive and has been really community-based approach to safety. And I think that it's worth mentioning here. It's recommendation number 82 to fully fund all community safety and well-being plan, the entire plan aspects with committed dollars instead of an application-based system. And I will drop the community safety and wellbeing plan is, you can access it online and I'll drop it in. Those were just the two that I got to just in those couple minutes that I had. If anybody else wants to share something that hasn't been inspiring to them, go for it. And now we can probably open up for also questions and comments.
Yeah, and
Two.
I'll just stop sharing so I can help out with that as well. So yeah. If anyone has any questions or comments, happy to answer them. If you have any specific questions about, could I delegate on